We are going to get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Sassenhausen, and I am the event coordinator at Heritage Christian Services. Thank you for joining us this evening for our webinar, Walking Through the Last Season of Life with Your Loved One. At the end of the webinar, I will provide a link to an optional survey. We would appreciate your feedback on this webinar and future webinars. If you have any questions during the webinar, please write them down in the chat, and we will do our best to answer those questions. If we run out of time at the end, then we will reach out to you to follow up on your question after the webinar. I would now like to introduce our presenter for tonight's webinar, Ruth Benjamin. Ruth was a longtime employee at Heritage Christian Services and still works with us from time to time as a nurse educator, and she was the director of nursing. Ruth is an RNBC, a CRRN, a CDDN, an RNCTNP, an LNC, and an aging and end-of-life care planner. I will let Ruth take over and introduce herself some more.
Thank you, Megan. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening for this webinar. I just wanted to add a couple things to Megan's introduction. I wanted to say it really, truly is an honor to work with those we support, with families, staff, and the nursing team concerning end-of-life care. It really is a true passion of mine, and I really do hold it close to my heart. I believe that everyone deserves to die with dignity, respect, and to be made as comfortable as possible throughout the dying process. So, that is my forte and something that I am working with now throughout the organization. And with that said, though, I'll be really honest with you to say my preference would be to be in person with you. I find it a little impersonable to talk about this subject online and not having that contact with you, but we're going to do the best we can. So before I hide behind my screen, so to speak, I wanted to start out by asking you, does anybody have any specific questions that they're hoping to have answered tonight? Just so that, and there's nothing worse than coming out of a webinar or a training and not have the questions answered that you had to start with why you came. So I just wanted to make sure there wasn't something that was really pressing on somebody that I can make sure to incorporate into the presentation.
Yes, my specific, just wondering if there's some gems in there, and it seemed like it alluded to, I ran into some very difficult situations with my son when he passed because of the OPWDD. And my being a guardian, and as sick as he was, and as many agencies I was involved with, including Heritage Christian, I never knew about the little tiny clause about the very end and having that paperwork in place, and it all happened so fast. So it was a big nightmare, and I'm so excited to see if this is what this is about, so other families don't have to go through that, because it was one of the most difficult situations.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Lauren. And yes, we will touch on a lot of those things tonight, I think. And then I'll be more than happy to answer any other questions that you have. Okay. Anybody else? All right. If not, I thought I would start out with a little face-to-face, because that's what I really like, and just share some tips with you that I frequently give to families that can be helpful in medical decision-making in general, and when we're faced with making end-of-life medical decisions for a loved one, right? So some of these little tips include, be sure you have a circle of support for yourself and for your loved one. Okay, so that circle of support doesn't mean that they're going to make the decisions, but what it does mean is that you've got somebody you can talk to. And whether that's a friend, whether it's other family members, whether it's your nurse at the house, whoever, you want to make sure that you have people that you're comfortable with, that you can talk with. Okay. The next one is involve your loved one in the decision making when that's possible. So, a lot of times, families are making decisions. And sometimes I feel like maybe the person that's involved could be a little bit more involved in that decision making. So, we want to think about that and we want to involve them, if that's possible. The next one is, don't be afraid to ask questions to a trusted physician, a nurse, other medical personnel. And I've seen it happen a lot where families are faced with a crisis, a medical crisis with their loved one. And before you know it, you have doctors and, specialists and physicians coming at you and asking, does he have a mulch form? Does he have a DNR in place? Does he have a DNI? And that can be overwhelming to a family member. So, really making sure that you ask questions, and that will help you make informed decisions. And if you're making informed decisions, you're going to feel really good about those decisions you're making. And we'll talk a little bit more about informed decision making a little bit later on. Be sure that the language and the terminology that's being used is something that you can understand. A lot of times doctors talk, in all this medical lingo, and, you see people there just kind of shaking their head. And again, a lot of that is the adrenaline and kind of, being in that situation for families. It's hard, but don't be afraid to say, doctor, I don't understand what you're saying. Could you bring that down a couple, bring it down a couple octaves so I really understand what you're saying. If you need to use other means of communication, especially if your loved one is involved, then we should do that, whether it's pictures, whether it's an interpreter, whether it's sign language, all of those things are things that we need to think about, and we can think about those things ahead of time. What kinds of things is it, is my loved one going to need to be able to help them understand what's going on and the changes in their medical situation as well. So take time to think about the information that you received. So don't feel pushed. Sometimes, doctors are in a hurry, and so I think families feel pushed to make a decision. Yes, okay, that's what we'll do. Where if it's not like a life-threatening situation in that moment in time, don't be afraid to take a day and think about it and go back to that circle of support and talk to other people. So, to me, I find that that's very important too, just to make sure families don't feel rushed and don't feel like they have to make a decision on the spot. And then take time to stop and think about what it is your loved one might want if they were making this decision for themselves. So I know, we all love the people we support and our family members and so forth, and we want to protect them. We want to make sure that, we're trying to make the right decision for sure, but try to think about, well, what would Johnny want if he were in this decision-making process? And sometimes that goes back to having a conversation with your loved one. And I mean, we should all be doing this at home as well. Do we have those conversations with loved ones? But for people we support too, it's thinking about, well, would this person want to go back and forth to the hospital on a frequent basis? Would they want a G-tube if they couldn't eat PO anymore, by mouth anymore? Would they want to endure all of the medical treatments that sometimes can happen to sustain their life? So those are all things that, we can really start thinking about ahead of time. And it doesn't mean we have to dwell on them, but sometimes it's good just to think about those things and put it in perspective of what would our loved one want if they could make the decision. So that's being sure that your decisions are person-centered. How does your loved one respond to medical interventions? Is it really very scary to them, or are they okay with it? Are they okay with hospitalizations? Are they fearful of medical procedures? What are their fears in general? So again, really thinking about those things. And then what is important to you and your loved one when considering quality of life versus quantity of years lived? Quality of life versus quantity of years lived. And neither is wrong, right? For some people, it's really, really important, you know, hey, I'm going to live till I'm 100. And for other people, it's like, no, I've done all the world traveling I want to do. I've done everything I want. I'm ready when the Lord wants to take me. I'm ready. So really thinking about those things and trying to think a little bit about that for your loved one as well. What's more important to them? Is it how many years they live, or is it the quality of life that they're living? Okay. And then the last thing for tips that I have, and this is probably the most important one that I can think of when it comes to end of life, is making sure that you involve palliative care early on. So you want to involve palliative care to help provide both knowledge and emotional support for you and your loved one. And I've worked with palliative care a lot, and they are wonderful. They are great. So if you can get involved with palliative care, that is a real positive. And I will tell you, there's times where people have been in the ICU at the hospital, and I've recommended to the family, you know, ask for a palliative care consult. Just ask them, you know, to have somebody from palliative care come up. And one of the things that comes back to the families is, we do this all the time, you know, we don't really need palliative care. Well, advocate for yourself and your loved one and say, well, I understand that, but I really want to talk to somebody in palliative care. It's important to me. So that you get that support from somebody who specializes in the field of end of life and decision making, because they really will help you through it. And I've really been involved in enough circumstances where I have seen particular palliative care doctors walk through the entire way with somebody through the end of their life, and, you know, cry with the parents, come to the funeral for the person involved. They just really, you know, it takes a special person to do it, and they are those special people. So think about that as well. So, you know, knowledge is power. So if we have the knowledge of what certain definitions and so forth mean, I think it will be helpful, not only for the rest of the presentation, but it'll help you in the long run as you go through things. So the first one is capacity assessment. So in our means, what that means is a person with IDD, they sometimes will have to have a capacity assessment completed, and it needs to be completed by it's a psychological evaluation to find out if that person has the ability to make decisions or has the ability to put a healthcare proxy in place. So to choose a healthcare proxy. And we're going to talk more about a healthcare proxy and what capacity assessment means related to healthcare proxy as we go on. The next one is the New York State, or the New York's Family Healthcare Decision Act. And this is something people are going to hear more and more about in the future. And this allows, what it really says is everybody has the right to make decisions, and the person, the decision maker, becomes the person that we support. They're the decision maker. And then that person has people who support him or her around him, and they help the person that we're supporting make the decisions. So we're going to talk more about that piece later too, but understand that that is something that will become more and more prevalent as 2023 ends. There's going to be more and more talk about that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Consent for us, in the meaning of consent, is going to be that information is given to you, and then you give consent back for them to do something. So basically that's consent. But what's really important is informed consent, right? Because with informed consent, all of your questions are answered first, so that you're making an informed decision as well. So the professional is really talking to you and defining, you know, what's going to happen in that medical treatment or in the surgery or whatever is going to happen. So, and they're answering all of your questions. And then besides informed consent, the piece goes in there of informed decision making. So you're making your decisions based on this informed consent. Okay. Healthcare proxy, it's really important that we understand for healthcare proxy, and I've got more slides on healthcare proxy, but for a healthcare proxy right now, just make sure that you understand that the person that wants a healthcare proxy. So if you have a loved one, sometimes what'll happen is they'll go to the doctor's office and they'll come back with paperwork for a healthcare proxy. And it's like, okay, the doctor doesn't understand. This person has to have a capacity assessment prior to putting a healthcare proxy in place. So the capacity assessment is done, and it shows that the person who wants a healthcare proxy, they have the capability of making an they have the capability of making a decision of who will be their healthcare proxy and make decisions for him or herself once they cannot do it. It does not mean that this person has to have the capability of making and understanding all of the medical decisions. So they don't need to understand the ins and outs of all the medical procedures and all of that kind of stuff. What they do need to understand is they simply need to know and understand that they're giving another person, which they call the healthcare agent, the ability to make decisions for them or on their behalf when they no longer can make the decisions, okay? And a lot of times what'll happen is when that kicks into play, let's say the loved one can no longer make the decisions, they're very ill, what will happen more than likely is they will do another capacity. And once they do the other capacity and they deem that that person cannot make or participate in the decisions, that's when the healthcare proxy can jump in and make decisions for that person. So a lot of times what I see is the request for another capacity before the healthcare proxy makes decisions for somebody who has the healthcare proxy. It's also really important to understand what is life-sustaining treatment. So life-sustaining treatment is any treatment that will potentially save or prolong a person's life. So that could be something like cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It could be ventilation. It could be a G-tube. It could even be dialysis, because that is considered life-sustaining treatment, any of those. If they didn't have a G-tube, if they weren't going for dialysis, that person's life would more than likely end because they weren't getting the proper nutrition, or their body wasn't, getting rid of the poisons that kind of build up where they need dialysis to get rid of that when their kidneys are no longer working. So that's usually when dialysis happens, but those are all considered life-sustaining. And so life-sustaining treatments. So it's important to understand what life-sustaining treatments are. And a person who has capacity, or a person who is the has guardianship for somebody, or a healthcare proxy, if the person is no longer capable of making their own decisions, they all will have the right to make these decisions for the person. But sometimes to have the ability to make those decisions, they have to go through a certain process, and that's called the 6-step process. And we're going to go through that later. But understand what life-sustaining treatment is at this point. So anything that's a treatment that potentially saves or prolongs that person's life is life-sustaining treatment. Sometimes, if, like I said, if they have a healthcare proxy or they can make the decision for themselves, then that's that. But otherwise, there is a process that we need to go through before those decisions can be finalized, that they don't want life-sustaining treatment.
Ruth, we have a question in the chat that says, how does guardianship 17A relate to all of this?
Yep, we're going to talk about that. We will get to that right after these definitions. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Palliative care, know that is a specialized medical care for people. And palliative care itself is usually for people that are living with a serious illness. So that would be like cancer, heart failure, end of like kidney failure, those types of things, they're in palliative care because they're very ill. But it's important to understand in palliative care, they can still have treatment for their illness. They can still have curative treatment for their illness in palliative care. Okay. So it is a specialized care, specialized doctors, and they are great. And the person is usually seriously ill, but remember, they can still have all of the treatments, including curative treatment. Where when we talk about hospice care or comfort care, and these words are sometimes you're going to hear them used interchangeably. We at Heritage use them to separate it a little bit so people don't get confused. If somebody is in comfort care, it's just what it says. It is providing them comfort. They're no longer going back and forth to the hospital. They're no longer having treatments, curative treatments any longer. We are just keeping them comfortable. Okay. Hospice care, hospice services are pushed in when somebody becomes really sick and we need specialized nursing to help us when somebody's in the home with comfort care. So then we turn to hospice, and then we say the person is on hospice services with hospice care. So you can have comfort care without hospice services. I know that can be a little confusing, but let's say somebody comes home from the hospital on comfort care, which means we would give them all the care that we possibly could and keep them as comfortable as possible within their home without going back and forth to the hospital. And let's say, you know what, they've kind of stabilized. And so the hospice services that we had might say it's been 6 months and they're stable, we're going to pull out. So hospice care pulls out. So we don't have that specialized service, but the person is still on comfort care. They're still not going back and forth to the hospital. They're still not being treated with, you know, a lot of appointments and curative care. They have meds in the house that would be given for somebody that's on hospice care as well to make sure that they're comfortable. We just wouldn't have that extra support from hospice itself. And
Ruth,
then
I'm sorry, it's Jillian. We do have a question that asks, is the New York Family Healthcare Decision Act new?
it's not new, but it's taking on a lot more momentum, let's say. We're going to talk a little bit about that further on in the presentation. And then if that still doesn't answer your question, I'll go into it a little bit more. And then artificial nutrition and hydration. This is a form of medical treatment that allows the person to continue to receive nutrition and hydration when they are no longer able to eat or drink by mouth. So there's different ways artificial nutrition and hydration can be given, right? So the first one I have here is IV nutrition. So that is, it's liquid solution and it's given through an IV line or a PICC line, and it goes directly into the bloodstream. And that usually is very short term. You know, we don't use that long term. But if we're talking about long term need for nutrition and somebody can't eat by mouth, then we're talking more about a G-tube placement. So a G-tube is inserted into the stomach. Sometimes it's inserted into through the stomach and into the small intestines. But then the staff or at home, mom, dad, whoever, can feed that person through a tube that actually goes directly into the stomachs or the small intestine. And that's how they get their nourishment that way. So that is going to be artificial nutrition and hydration. I think it's important too to know who mental hygiene legal services are. We work with mental hygiene legal services when we need to, as far as they provide legal services. Okay, they provide legal services. They're lawyers. They provide legal services and advice and assistance to individuals receiving care in a certified setting. So as it relates to end of life, once a family and a doctor decide that they're going to ask for life-sustaining treatment to be withheld, whether it be just a DNR, whether it be a DNR, DNI, whether it be that they want comfort care, whatever it is, that paperwork, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the steps, but just know that the paperwork has to go through Mental Hygiene Legal Services. They will come out and see the person, and then they will write a letter of no objection if they don't object to whatever's being asked for by the family. And not only are they involved, but also the paperwork goes through to Marisa Geithner, our CEO, and she also has to write a letter of no objection. So she really depends upon, and Marisa's actually gone to a hospital with me before to see somebody. She takes this very seriously, but you know, she also has to be involved. So it's up to me to like keep her up to date on what's going on with people medically, that I know where I know people are going to be asking for either withholding or withdrawing life-sustaining treatment. You know, going over things with her so she knows what's going on, providing her the paperwork from the hospital of everything that the doctors have done and the treatment that's been provided and why we're looking at withholding or withdrawing life-sustaining treatment. And so that gives her the information that she needs. And if she needs to, she will go and see that person as well to make that decision. Okay, so that's how Mental Hygiene Legal Services is involved, though. They are there to protect the people that we support. And, you know, that's why in 2010, they implemented a law that says we needed to go through a 6-step process for somebody that wants to withhold or withdraw any life-sustaining treatment. And that's when all of this stuff became part of a law, including DNR, DNI, and G-tube and comfort care. So all of those are a part of the 6-step process, and we'll go through that. The first one, though, that I'm going to talk about is that healthcare proxy. The healthcare proxy paperwork can be implemented for a person supported with intellectual and developmental disabilities under the following circumstances. So the person has someone they love and trust who is actively involved in their life to be their healthcare proxies. So in other words, we don't, you know, we would never, even though the doctor sends the paperwork home with the person and says, you know, this person should get a healthcare proxy, you know, we want to be very careful with that. And we are, you know, of talking to that person. And first of all, remember, they have to have the capacity completed to make sure that they are capable and understand what a healthcare proxy is. They don't have to understand all the paperwork, all the medical mumble jumble. They have to understand what a healthcare proxy is and what they're going to do for them. They're going to make decisions for them when they can't make them. So, you know, that's the big thing. But a lot of times the paperwork will come home with anybody from the doctor's office. And, you know, so we really need to sit down and talk to that person. Do you have somebody? And if we know that they will, you know, no problem with the help, with the actual capacity, we still want to make sure, do they have somebody that they love and trust, that they really want to be making their decisions for them if they can't make them? The person has had a recent capacity then. So that person, again, is going to have a capacity assessment indicating that they have the capacity to choose a health care proxy to make their decisions for them when they can no longer make their own decisions or be a part of those decisions. Okay. The paperwork for the healthcare proxy is completed between the person supported and their medical providers. So this isn't something that Ruth Benjamin would fill out. This is something that the person themselves, along with their healthcare provider, it's usually the PCP, would fill out the paperwork. But remember, they have to have the capacity first. And then if the capacity shows that they are able to assign a healthcare proxy, then they would go ahead and go to the doctors and complete the paperwork with their physician. There are times I know that the family is involved with that paperwork as well. But I guess what I'm saying is, as nurses at Heritage, we kind of back away from that because this really is a decision that the person is making with their own physicians and sometimes with family involvement. The paperwork is signed by the physician, the person for which the document is for, and a witness who has to be somebody at the office. It cannot be somebody that, it can't be the healthcare, it can't be the healthcare proxy or healthcare agent, as they call it sometimes. It can't be that person. It can't be a staff. It can't be an RN. It really needs to be somebody who's not connected with, in this case, Heritage Christian Services or whoever. Okay. And then to realize too, that it really is not suggested that a person who has guardianship for somebody, that the person also have a healthcare proxy. Now, I'm not going to say that that's never happened. It has, but usually the healthcare proxy is the guardian. Okay. So, because what happens is if the person assigns, they want, let's say a good friend to be their healthcare proxy, and their parent is also their guardian, that can cause some conflict because the guardian is always going to supersede the healthcare proxy. Okay, so you don't really want to get into a situation like that. So if you're already guardian for your loved one, a healthcare proxy is probably not the best way to go unless you yourself are going to be their healthcare proxy. And they really frown upon that, but like I said, I have seen it done. And then this is the healthcare proxy format. It's a very simple format that gets filled out. So, it states I and whoever the person is hereby appoint, and then it's the person's name that they're appointing as their healthcare proxy and the address and phone number of that person. And it goes through what is it that there might be an alternative agent as well. So you can put a second person in there. And then they describe what it is, what their wishes are. So they can state what their wishes are within this healthcare proxy format. And then the person prints their name, their address. They can also decide, it's optional if they want to be an organ donator at that point in time. And then there's the witnesses, and there has to be 2 different witnesses. And really, once they have the capacity and they filled out the paperwork for the healthcare proxy, that's it. So that goes into their chart. It goes to the doctor, keeps a copy, and they then have a healthcare proxy, and it would get pulled out of the chart and at the hospital or wherever the need was. The other one that people are asking about is under the mental hygiene law. In 2022, some legislation was passed for supportive decision-making. And I know that there had to be some of this before that because we actually had a person at Heritage that went through supportive decision-making prior to this date. But it is becoming something that they are looking at more and more. So there's definitions that go along with this as well. The decision maker is the person being supported to make their own decisions. So that's the decision maker. All right, so the decision maker, and then it's, what they're saying is Article 82.3 says that every adult shall be presumed to have capacity to enter into supportive decision-making agreement unless the adult has a court-appointed legal guardian. So if they have a legal guardian, it probably means that the person, cannot make decisions for themselves or be a part of the decision-making. But what they're really pushing now is that, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have just as much rights as everybody in the community. And they're saying that the presumption, the only way that the presumption of capacity can be rebutted is by clear and convincing evidence in a courtroom. Okay, so that's what they're looking at for that. And they're saying a disability does not it's not evidence that a person does not have capacity. Okay, just because they have a disability does not mean that they cannot make decisions. So the decision maker then can enter into a supportive agreement, and he can have one supportive person, he can have 13 supportive people. And he can have a healthcare agent, and he can have somebody that helps him with money, and he can have somebody that helps him with, I don't know, any number of things. But when I asked, was it one person? They said, nope, it can be as many people to support that person as that decision maker would like. So then the decision maker, just to keep in mind, they can revoke all or part of the agreement at any time. And then to go into who is the supporter is a voluntary person or persons then that agree to assist with the decision maker in making their own decisions. So again, they're there to help support them, but the person themselves is making the decision. Sometimes there's a facilitator that will actually, it's somebody through OPWDD that works to educate both the decision maker and the supporter about supportive decision making, and works with them with writing up the agreements, etc. So supportive decision making means it's a means by which decision maker, which is the person supported, utilize support from trusted circle of support. So it can be one person, it can be many people, to make their own decisions about their life, to including their healthcare. So then that's all put into this agreement. And there are rules and regulations related to supportive decision making that are not yet complete. And that's why I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want you to know that it is going to become more and more upfront. And they are, and I said, well, okay, so the people who already have guardians, are they kind of grandfathered in? And she said, nope, we're looking at everybody. We're, so even if they have guardianship right now, there is a way to take away the guardianship, so to speak, and put them into this kind of situation where they have people around them and that support group around them to help them make decisions. And then if you look at 82.12, it talks about limitations and liability, which just really, there's a lot in here about physicians that are immune to certain actions and disclosures of personal information about the decision maker, et cetera. So again, I bring this up just so that you can be knowledgeable a little bit that is coming up, if that's something that you're interested in, that you have that knowledge. And then the other thing to address is the actual 6-step process for a MOLST form to be put in place when somebody wants to withhold or withdraw life-sustaining treatment. So with that, what happens is the 6-step process is initiated and completed by the physician and the family. Okay, again, that has nothing to do with the nurses caring for your loved one or whatever. It really is a decision. Sometimes, the family will come and say, I see a lot of changes. I want to put something in place. I want a DNR in place. I want a DNI in place. I want both in place. And so what we'll say to them is, okay, your first step is to make an appointment with their primary and talk to the primary physician about it. So that's what they do. They get together with the primary physician. They go through the 6-step process. And I'll show you that, but they go through that. They also have to have a capacity evaluation, which shows that, that person themselves does not have the capability of making the decision. So their guardian is making this decision for them. They have to have a concurring physician that also must agree with the 6-step process. So there's 2 physicians involved. And those physicians must also provide supporting documentation of why life-sustaining treatment would be an extraordinary burden for their loved one. So they have to have some pretty significant letters written of why it would be an extraordinary burden for Johnny to have, undergo CPR or be placed on a ventilator, or why the family believes that it's ready for, this person is ready for comfort care, or, so it's not, again, this is all to protect the person. So that's why this process is put in place, is they really want to protect the person and make sure that we're doing the right thing. So that 6-step process, again, then has to go to Mental Hygiene Legal Services, which we talked about. And for us, it goes to our CEO as well, because we're a non-for-profit organization. It goes to Marisa Geithner.
Ruth,
So-
we have a question in the chat. Christine asks, so my understanding is regardless of having guardianship, your loved one still has to have a capacity assessment. Does Heritage Christian Services provide this psychological assessment?
We ourselves don't provide it, but I'm able to provide different people who do provide it. Okay, so we don't have anybody within our organization that does it, but we have physicians that we work with that will do it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ruth. And we have about 10 minutes left.
All right, so again, the CEO of the organization reviews the 6-step process, the letters of determination, capacity assessment, all of that goes to Mental Hygiene Legal Services. And, once everything is approved through the 6-step process, then and only then can the actual pink MOLTS form that maybe you guys are used to seeing, that's when all that gets filled out by the physician and the involved party, which means their legal guardian. So that's when all of that is filled out. And then once the MOLTS form is completed, it should be readily available for emergency personnel. A copy then goes with the person. And so it's with them at all times. And also it would accompany them to the hospital. The doctors would have a copy of that, of the 6-step process, but also the MOLTS form. I will tell you that if somebody's quite ill in the hospital, the same process still has to be done, but it does seem to go a lot faster. A lot of times when we're trying to do it on the outside of a hospital, so on an outpatient basis, it really can take us a couple of months even to go through and try to get the paperwork in order. So this is the MOLTS form here that you can see. I'm hoping, can you pull that up for them? So you can see the step 1 is the guardian. So whoever the 17A guardian's name, and if there's standby or more than one guardian, their name goes in there. And it does go down the surrogates list. So let's say the parents are no longer living, then it also can go to an adult child, a sibling, an active family member. So it goes right down the list of who can help make these decisions. And then we have to put in specifically what life-sustaining treatment is being requested to be withdrawn or withheld. So that all has to go in here. And is the decision, it's usually checked that decision is made orally because the family is working with the doctor. There has to be witnesses. There has to be the capacity assessment, and that also has to be completed. And both the attending physician and the person who did the capacity assessment have to sign here, as well as we need to have the letter of capacity from whoever did that assessment. And then when the family and the doctor looks at this, this is the most important part, is they have to look at step 4, and they have to make sure that the person that they want this MOLTS form to be completed for, the 6-step process, and eventually the MOLTS form completed for, that they meet the criteria here in A, something in A, and something in B. Okay, so it can't be one or the other, it has to be both. And that's where sometimes we get tangled up, where people will say, nope, not yet, not now. Mental hygiene legal services, they may say, I understand, but right now, we're going to object to, and maybe they'll just object to the no G2, but they'll say yes to the DNR, DNI. But the reason for that is the person they have to meet the criteria here. They have to have a terminal condition. They have to have permanent unconsciousness, or they have to have a medical condition other than DD that requires life-sustaining treatment, other than DD, which requires life-sustaining treatment, but would be irreversible, no matter what it was. So, for example, you could use cancer in there. If they had cancer and the doctor's saying it's really not going to make a difference, or dementia would be something that wasn't related to IDD, but it also would, you could put that in there. But then also remember, they have to do this other piece to step 4. So they have to say that it would be an extraordinary burden on the individual, and they have to explain why. And, or they can say that the expected outcome of the life-sustaining treatment would not be hopeful that that person would recover. So this all has to be completed. We have to explain why there is no reasonable hope of maintaining life. There's also a place in here for artificial nutrition and hydration that can be filled out, be checked and filled out, why that would be an extraordinary burden for that person. I'll give you an example, would be somebody with dementia. If they have dementia, then, it really is a terminal illness. And so to put in a G tube probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but those are the kinds of things that the doctor will walk through with the family. But that's also why I say palliative care is wonderful. They can help make those decisions, and what is that person ready for? Why do they think that person would meet the criteria for an extraordinary burden? Or, what, right now they're eating well. Nope, they're not going to meet that criteria. So we use palliative care a lot to help us out. And then there's the notifications that have to be done. Again, that is to Mental Hygiene Legal Services, that is to MRISA. And then they have 48 hours to get back to Mental Hygiene Legal Services with a letter of objection or no objection. That would be MRISA. And Mental Hygiene Legal Services has 48 hours before they go and see that person. They have 48 hours to do it in, and then they also would write their letter of objection or no objection. But I wanted to at least maybe go over some of the frequently asked questions by parents. The first one is, if I am a guardian for my loved one, why can't I make advanced directions for them? And in a nutshell, it really is the law that was put in place June of 2010 to protect people with IDD, that allows for decision making related to life-sustaining treatment at the time when it's needed, but not in advance. So, you can't make those decisions right now if somebody is healthy. Okay. So it's all about protecting the person. That's why they created the law in the first place. The next question, when can my loved one appoint a healthcare proxy? The answer to that one is they can appoint a healthcare proxy if they've had a capacity that shows that they have the ability to understand what a healthcare proxy is, and that they have someone that they love and trust involved in their life that they want to be their healthcare proxy. The next question, can I be a guardian and a healthcare proxy for my loved one at the same time? Again, this is not recommended, but I have seen it done. That a guardian could be both, but it isn't recommended. And it definitely is not recommended to have a healthcare proxy and a guardian, because there could be conflict there, and the guardian is always going to supersede. The next question, can I begin the 6-step process now for my loved one so it is complete? And the answer to that is no. We have to go through the 6-step process. So we can't just put something in place like an advanced directive. The next one, if I choose to withhold life-sustaining treatment for my loved one, can I then change my mind? Absolutely, yes. So if your loved one has something put in place to withhold life-sustaining treatment and their health improves, and you think, you know what, I want to disregard the DNR, DNI that I put in place, can that be done? Absolutely, it can be done. It's a matter of you just making sure we know about it. It's a matter of writing a note, making sure that the doctor knows about it, but you can always change your mind. Can my loved one remain in their home if they're receiving palliative care or hospice care? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. The person can stay in the home while they're receiving palliative care. And remember, palliative care is a person may be quite ill, but they can still have all the treatments. They still will get all of the treatments, curative treatments, all of their doctor's appointments, everything that they normally get. But we have that extra support from palliative care. And hospice and comfort care, absolutely yes. We can do hospice and comfort care in the home. We've done it many, many times. And the idea there again is just really making sure that that person is comfortable and they're not going back and forth to the hospital. There's no more, what a lot of parents will say is, I don't want my loved one poked and prodded and going back to the hospital anymore. And if their health deems it so, and the 6-step process is done, we can certainly care for them in the home and provide the care that they need. And we would pull in hospice nursing besides. And what they do is they really are very, we use them a lot for pain management because they're the experts in pain management. But we don't really have anybody at Heritage as a nurse that is the expert in pain management. So that, and it's always great to have a second set of eyes. So we always use an external agency for hospice nursing services. Next question, can I bring my loved one home when this documentation is in place? Absolutely. So they can still come home to visit as long as it's safe for them to do so and you feel comfortable with their care. Next one, will my loved one still receive needed routine medical care while receiving palliative care? I think I already answered that one. Absolutely. Will my loved one still receive needed routine medical care while receiving hospice care? And then the answer to that one is they won't receive the same routine care because remember, hospice care or comfort care really focuses on comfort. And therefore, a lot of those routine appointments at that point are canceled. We're careful though with those because somebody can be on comfort care for quite some time. So if it's important to them and they really enjoy, let's say, putting puzzles together, it's important for them to still have an eye exam maybe, right? Or they're still eating, maybe it's still important for them to have a dental appointment. So we don't say that they can't have any routine appointment, but we do find that a lot of times, you know, a lot of the routine appointments or specialty appointments will be canceled.
I do have some questions
Okay.
that I think will be beneficial. So one is, can Heritage help with this if we have self-direction and are not in a certified home? And does Heritage charge to help with this?
So we're saying a family from outside of Heritage needs help.
Yes, they have self-direction, but are not in a certified home.
Okay. So if I were to answer the question, I would say yes, you know, be more than happy to help. And I've given them, you know, I've said that you can have my, you know, my email or whatever, and you can email me. As far as Heritage itself, I think we probably would need to go through and, because remember, I work as like a consultant because I've retired now. So we would have to ask Heritage themselves how they feel about that or how much they could help, if that makes sense. Other questions?
Okay. Lauren, if you wanted to share your comment that you shared in the chat before we close out for the evening, then you are more than welcome to.
So the 6-step process, that was one of my questions, because what happened in my case, because my son was nonverbal and traumatically brain injured from the age of 4, and he lived at home with me. I took care of him until he was 30 when he passed. My problem was when I went to his doctor in December before I felt he was failing, the doctor said, well, the blood pressure's good and everything's looks okay. And it wasn't until the following July, after he had such bad sleep apnea and things like that, it took me a long time to get it took me 8 months to get that appointment, and that was pretty dire. And they wanted to use a ventilator at that point. But at any rate, I didn't know about this process until July 2nd, and he died August 19th. And the doctors that were telling me about it were trying to put something in place, but they all went on vacation, and it didn't go through the OPWDD. And I was left, unattended and the whole bit. So I'm really curious and just hoping that this more information is out there like this. And I still think there's a little or a big hole. And I know that's in there for a good reason, because people weren't served and bad things were happening. But there's still a hole in there about people who are cared for at home, and they're not in a hospital, things are failing, things happen sometimes rapidly, and you need the 6-step process and the law and all these things. And I don't know how. I guess that's the part I've been talking with Dr. Sussman, who's a palliative care person, which Ruth mentioned. That's such a huge help. That person knows a lot of things. I didn't have that till the end either, but he was a big help. And he and I've been trying to, educate more, talking at Strong or doing things to other doctors. It's like just wanting to know, worried for other parents that they would come into this situation where it's last minute and there's not time to go through all this paperwork and process and wait and submit and have people come out, that person might die in that process. So I guess
Lauren,
my question is,
go ahead.
no, just the process of getting this more information out. If I can be of help, or is there any other things we can do, or when you do have someone who's so incapacitated, because when it was all said and done, after the whole process of the death certificate, it was determined that he actually passed because of his initial accident 26 years ago. So that would have been something like, if somebody knew that, would we put that in the healthcare? So I don't mean to get so complicated. I'm just trying to find out. I'm just concerned. I just want more of this information out for parents that do have someone who's not able to really make a lot of decisions on their own. Maybe they're not.
You and I need to hook up, Lauren. We'll hook up.
Thank you. Okay.
But I really do want to make sure people understand is you're right. There's a lot of physicians out there that do not understand the 6-step process.
Nope.
They don't know about the 6-step process, and
Nope.
we have to educate them on the 6-step process.
Yes.
So the more education that we can do, the better, right? So it's people like you that are really trying to get that out there. I feel the same way. There's a few that go through very smoothly, but mostly, there's a lot of bumps in the road. And I think I have it all down, and I've been doing this for a long time, and there's more bumps in the road. Something else comes up that I've never encountered before. So, this was a really quick synopsis. I felt like I was rushed really to get everything in an hour, but know that we're here to help. If any of you have more questions, would like to talk more, we can certainly do that. And I'm more than available to help you. All right. So the difference between palliative care and hospice. So people in palliative care have a serious illness. Palliative care is often seen as the bridge over to hospice sometimes. So, they're rarely sick, but they can get all the treatments, including curative treatment, until they go over to the hospice or comfort care, where they no longer would receive curative or, a lot of those appointments like we talked about. People can still receive curative treatment on palliative care. Hospice care is a part of palliative care. It comes underneath that domain. People receiving hospice care have a serious illness without hope of reasonable recovery. Okay. Hospice care ensures the person's comfort, not a curative treatment. So care during the time of death, the surrendering death, what it's really important to know is that we need to understand that death comes in its own time, in its own way. It's kind of like a roadmap. So maybe we all want to get to this same destination, okay? But there's many different ways to get there. So understand that it's not going to be the same for every person. Death is as unique as the person who is experiencing it. It could be days, weeks, or even months before death itself occurs. We have had people, just so you know, in palliative care for over a year, and then hospice for another 6 months. So it's, it's different for every person. Sometimes it's a slow decline in the person's health related to disease process, while the physicians feel there's no reasonable chance for recovery, but it's still can be a slow process. Take into account the person's preferences, their needs and choices. End of life care can occur in different environments. So that's something I didn't bring up today, but remember, it can occur in the hospital, it can occur in a group home setting, it can occur in a family home setting. It can, so it's different. It's going to be a little bit different environment, but there are ways for it to occur in different environments. Once end of life or hospice or comfort care, then we discontinue all unnecessary medications and treatments once that person hits comfort care, because we're no longer poking them and prodding them and taking vital signs and getting weights and, all of those things. So then we talk about what is the multidisciplinary team, and just to remember that is, it includes everybody. It includes the site nurse. It includes direct support. Of course, they are really, really important in this process. The RN, the covering RN, LPNs, a lot of times we will put LPNs at the home in the evenings and so forth, the weekends, so there's more support. It includes family, of course. It includes spiritual care. Other clinicians, PT, OT, speech, dietitian, they're all included at times, depending on what's going on with the person, and the person being cared for to the extent possible. So there are families that don't want their loved one to know that they're in palliative or hospice care, but if they don't object to it and that person can participate, then we look to try to do that. And then what you might see in the months prior to death: withdrawal. Their sleep increases, words and verbal communication become less important, and touch and wordlessness take on more meaning. The person might become disoriented and confused. And then again, there's physical changes over that time. Food is perfectly natural for people to stop eating, and food is usually the first thing that they stop. Is PO food and then liquids. So liquids are preferred over solids, but then the person will slowly probably stop eating altogether and drinking. Their blood pressure might drop. Their body temperature is going to fluctuate. They could have fever. They could be cold. Skin color changes. Breathing changes. Their respirations may increase at times. You might see belly breathing. They might be more congested. The person may not be taking deep breaths and clearing their lungs the way they once did. So when we go through this with staff, we're really going into a lot more detail about these things and why they occur and what they can do. Just keep that in mind. What you see within 1 or 2 days to hours prior to death, sometimes there's a surge of energy. So we get a call saying, oh, Johnny's really awake today and he must be getting better. But really what that is you'll hear people call it the calm before the storm. It's kind of a surge where all of a sudden they're wakeful and they're alert and they're talking to their loved ones around them. And it's kind of that closure. We see that sometimes. There's restlessness due to lack of oxygen in the blood sometimes. Like we said, the breathing changes will occur. And when they first start to occur, that you might walk in one day and the breathing has changed a little bit, but you know what? Then the next day they're breathing normally. So that's the way it starts. It's kind of irregular, but toward the very end of their life, then those respirations will be very irregular with periods of what we call apnea, where they stop breathing, and that will continue till the time that they pass. The person becomes non-responsive. There's going to be decreased or no urinary output. Sometimes there's fear of unfinished business, and this may determine how resistant that person is to meeting death. So we always try to really think about what does this person, what could the bucket list, what can we do for them? What are the things that they want to tie off? We're always looking at those things. Physical care, comfort care is just that. It's keeping the person comfortable. So pain and use of pain medications, taking care of any breathing problems, skin integrity, GI problems, temperature sensitivity, fatigue, struggling with pain, causes the person to struggle in other areas. So pain is always my top conversation with staff. And while we might not be able to stop the disease process, we can certainly alleviate that person's pain and suffering, and we should. And those are the things we look at, and those are the reasons we call hospice nursing in to help us. We should not worry about drug addiction at the end of life. And I really do spend a lot of time talking with staff about this, because we have staff that are afraid to give the medications that the person requires, and really helping them through to understand it's okay, whatever the doctor has ordered, it's okay to give that. And, sometimes walking side by side with them to make sure that they're fully comfortable with that. Successful treatment of pain can also cause people to become drowsy and confused and have hallucinations. And if this occurs, we can certainly change medications. So we talk about that. It may take the body time to adjust to pain medications. So you got to give people a week or two to adjust. So they might be sleepier to start with, but in the end, if we can get them adjusted on pain medications, their quality of life for the time they have left with us is going to be much better. Okay. Pain management. A lot of times we do routine pain management, especially in a group home setting, because you have many different staff. So what might be, that person looks like they're in discomfort or pain to one person, may be different to somebody else. So we have found that it works best to give something around the clock, but then have medication to give for breakthrough pain. And that seems to work really well. So there's frequent adjustments to pain medication, and that's not uncommon. So we need to look at that, and we can't be afraid. We talk to staff about not being afraid to report that. We talk to them about the different types of breathing and how to address those different types of breathing, like raising the head of the bed, a side lying position, open the window, the use of fan and ice. And that's an old fashioned thing, but let me tell you, it works like a charm. Morphine and Ativan to relieve the sense of breathlessness. Skin integrity. So we talk all about skin integrity and how to maintain somebody's skin integrity. I'm not going to read it all. Digestive problems. We talk about, again, what problems they could see, and then the solutions, like, okay, instead of 3 large meals, do small meals, give them snacks in between, offer their favorite foods. And remember that they can have pizza at 2 a.m. if they want pizza at 2 a.m. We're there to, again, quality of life. Anything they kind of want is what they get at the end of life. And then going without food over time, we kind of already talked about that. That is the body's way of shutting down. We can encourage people to eat, but we certainly don't coax them. We don't force them to eat. Temperature and sensitivity, we don't take vital signs and so forth, but if somebody's skin feels warm and it feels really warm, you take off a cover, right? Or you may use a cool compress, or you may give Tylenol, but we don't, poke and prod people with vitals and all of that good stuff. But we do watch for all of these things in regards to temperature and sensitivity. We remember that people have little energy at the end of life sometimes. And so we try to keep things simple and provide rest periods in between activity and preserve their energy for things that are preferred activities for them. So if it means helping them eat, but that allows them to do things on their computer later or something, well, then that's what we want to do. Emotional needs, making sure we're giving them choice, understanding that the person may be scared and confused, really open-ended conversations and listening, helping them tie things off, spiritual care, clergy, support of their faith and their circle of support. All of those things are important. Explore the use of palliative care. Sometimes antidepressant meds can be helpful. Environment, looking at the environment, what does that person really like and want? So we've had people at the end of life where they're partying in the room and they've got dancing and music going and it's loud. And we have other people that just have somebody sitting beside them. But then I always tell people at the end that it's really their presence that can be the best gift of all. Okay. So, and the staff, I think, are very appreciative of training and getting their questions answered too. And sometimes we come back and train a second time, after it kind of sinks in a little bit, they ask for more training. So, staff are wonderful. I can't say enough about staff in the home. So any questions?
I don't think so, Ruth. I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Ruth. There's so much important information that you shared, and we greatly appreciate you taking the time to share it with us.
All right. Thank you,
Ruth,
guys.
Ruth, thank you so much. You did a terrific job. We really appreciate all you presented here today. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry it was kind of rushed, but we can do
Lot-
more.
A lot of
Yes.
great content. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.